I am going to officially call the day and the meeting to order. Thank you so much for coming out, and I hope it's not just the air conditioning that is inspiring you to come to be with us and to be inside, but I would understand it if it was. Welcome. My name is Cindy Gueli. For those of you who don't know, I'm president of AOI this year, and thank you so much for coming out to what is our last lunch event of this season. We have a recap of our May meeting that was with Kim Prothero-Williams about the DC alleyways. That is it is summarized in our newsletter. It is online on our website. It is also at our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, Bill Brown does an amazing job of making sure all of the videos are up there. And they are great not only to, yes, thank you, Bill. Not only to catch up if you missed something, but also kind of as a resource if there is a bit of information or something that you want, because it goes way back. On the website, there are the audio of our presentations also go even further back than the video. So those are terrific to take a look at or listen to as well. So I'm going to have that be our official account of our May meeting unless there are any objections. No, we're good. All right, that's our official account. I'm going to pass it on to Carol Michelle, our treasurer, to give us a treasurer's report and membership report.
We'll start with membership. We have 2 new members in June. Carolyn Baker, who is a guest who was invited by Nancy Hoffer. Carolyn, would you mind standing? Would you like to say?
Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Baker. I'm a District of Columbia native. I'm retired from IT sales. God was good because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I got to retire right after 9/11. And my friend Nancy here invited me. I really enjoyed the discussion on alley homes that you had. Was it last month, I guess?
It was last month.
Yeah, and having grown up in the district and realizing that a lot of my playmates were living in alley houses and not realizing until I was an adult that was kind of substandard housing. But I did learn a lot last month. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
And he's not here, but Bruce Pascal joined, and he was a graduate of Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda. He's a commercial real estate agent, and he's descended from Leo Pascal and Fred and Sarah Colmer, and he heard about AOI from his mother, Brenda Pascal, and I have a feeling that Bill has something to say.
So the newer Pascal's folks had been members of AOI since before I was a member of AOI. Paul Pascal was an attorney, and I think he was like an Alcoholic Beverage Control Board either member or he was always fighting the ABC on behalf of licensees. Was it the latter? Is that right? Okay. And they were fascinated with old vehicles, vintage vehicles, and I remember in an AOI talk back in the late 90s or early aughts, early zeros or something, of them recounting standing on vegetable crates as kids or teenagers at parades to watch parades and all in Washington. So it was just nice. And sadly, Brenda, his mother, has been unable to come to meetings, and she's not IT savvy, so she's missed a lot of things. So in welcoming, what's his son's name? Oh, sorry, Bruce, to the organization in an email, I said, well, now maybe you can help share AOI's activities with your mom, or better yet, why don't you bring her to a luncheon? So we'll see if that comes to pass.
Excellent.
And
but,
so,
Carolyn, we have actually one more new / renewal.
April, let's see, Patrick Rothwell joined in April, and I kind of messed up last month and didn't introduce him. He is an attorney, heard about AOI from his father. His ancestors are Richard Rothwell, Daniel Rothwell, et cetera, and they go, back generations in D.C. And Elaine Newman, I'm sorry, Elaine, I just want to say thank you for renewing. we kind of dropped her from the roles, and she's always been active, so she's still around.
So, and Philip Pinnell
Pardon me?
just joined.
Oh,
We got like,
rejoin.
on the spot.
Rejoin.
On
Thank
the
you.
spot.
That's who you were
Or
talking
rejoined.
about. Okay.
Rejoined, I should say. Yes, we're reinstating.
Yes, reinstated. Bill Brown can attest. I was a member for around 20 years. And before you were, yeah. And my friend Jeffrey Slavin, who invited me, is responsible for this prodigal son's reconnection. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
So,
let's see. Patrick Rothwell, Karen Baker, and Bruce Pascal. I would like to motion to approve their membership.
we need to give a quick vote to bring everybody back for our new members and to bring our returning members back. So, all in favor? Aye. All right, we've got new members. Thank you. Actually, Carolyn, while you're passing Bill, I'm going to give the mic to Bill because he's going to tell us about a fundraising project that.
Okay, but before
is
that, I'm
going on.
sorry, I forgot to ask if there were any visitors that would like to stand. Any guests, visitors? Oh, we got a lot.
We welcome you standing and telling us about yourself, but you are under no obligation to
you're
do
not
so.
under no
To be put on the
obligation, but
spot
if
to
you'd
give
like
your
to.
elevator speech at this particular moment in time.
My name is Camille Hazur, and I am a friend of Juliet Smith's, and so she invited me to a couple of months ago. It was lovely, and we really appreciate it. I am not a born Washingtonian, but I've spent the majority of my life here. New Orleans, actually Mobile, Alabama, but we think they're fused. Anyway, so I'm used to this heat. Anyway, so my neighbor came today with me, and we're looking at the possibility, because we've been here so long, we're probably eligible for membership.
You are eligible, yes.
And I'm Mimi Limbach, and I'm here because of Camille and louder. Can you hear? Okay. I'm Mimi Limbach, and I'm here because of Camille and Juliet, and it's a pleasure to be with this group. I have lived in Washington for 30 years, and we came in 1994. Love it here. My husband and I came from Pittsburgh. Westinghouse Electric Corporation brought me here. They transferred me here to run public affairs, which was a lot of fun. At any rate, but I do have other roots. I was telling Juliet, my great aunt Jane Davis Bradford lived here for many, many, many years, and in the 1920s, I'm told she tooled around Washington in an electric car, and she has had many fabulous stories about this city. Anyway, we love it here, and I'm so delighted to be part of this lunch.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
Welcome. Anybody else? Any other visitors that would like to?
Okay.
Yeah, go here and then I'll go here.
Hello, my name is Kai Walther. I'm a guest of Kim Bender. I'm the development manager at the Heinrich House Museum. I've been in DC for about 8 years. I don't think I'm eligible for membership. Oh, thank you. Pending eligibility, there we go. And I'm actually doing research on early gay life in DC, so I was particularly interested in this event today. I have a meeting I have to get to, so unfortunately I can't make it. But hopefully I'll be able to come again and continue learning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome.
Note of point, you can join as an associate member if you don't meet the membership
The residence
eligibility.
requirements.
Hi, I'm Katie McDonald. I tried to join, but somehow my membership didn't.
Yeah, if you could
quite
put the mic, pretend like you're Cher, and like in 1972, and put the mic right up to your mouth.
Okay.
There
Can
go.
you hear me now? All right. I have come a couple of times as the guest of Linda Ingram. I've lived in Washington since 1992, so that's more than 30 years, but several years of that I was overseas. We came here because I got a job with USAID, and at some point we really knew that we would retire here. And it wasn't a hard decision at all, but we lived here a lot and really enjoy Washington. Oh dear, I'm not used to doing this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Welcome. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, I will welcome all guests, named and otherwise, and we'll let Bill talk about a fundraising campaign for the. I won't spoil it. Firefighters Association.
Friendship Fire Association. I'll do it from here. For any of you that have been involved with AOI for 8 years or more, you'll know that we've actually gone through 4 waves of de-accession of DC Historic Fire Department equipment back to the Friendship Fire Association Museum. In 2015, during AOI's sesquicentennial year, we de-accessioned our final apparatus, which we had been in the care of, most of it since 1908, back to the Fire Museum. 5 pieces of apparatus, 2 bronze bells, and the Friendship Fire Association was the recipient of one of AOI's sesquicentennial $25,000 grants that we gave that year for education or restoration or whatever they wanted to do. They are currently planning, the DC Fire and EMS is planning for a rehab of Engine 3 down on New Jersey Avenue next to Kogog Liquors and all. Can everyone picture that? For a new firehouse, they're going to keep the facade of the old firehouse, provide space for the museum upstairs, other grand plans that I don't even know if I'll live to see. But anyhow, that's what they're talking about. So one of the things that the Friendship Fire Association has done is the 1910 or so, it's 1905, I think 1905, American LaFrance horse-drawn steam pumper, which they and AOI paraded with in the Palisades Parade and other events for many years. They've sent off up to Connecticut or someplace for a cosmetic restoration. I talked about this a few months ago because they had a fundraiser, and I've got a QR code and a flyer on the back table. To have the piece of apparatus conserved, it will not be drawn by horses again, it will not be under its own power, but on a trailer. And they wanted to have this done in time for the 2025 centennial of the last running of the horse-drawn fire apparatus in DC. So they had a $50,000 goal. I was not going to get into the figures, but it's so sad, I think I will.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as of 2015, AOI is separated from anything having to do with fire department, fire history and all in terms of financial support, because we sort of spent all of our money, we gave more than we should have to them in support. So we have not since then. So we're not in on this conservationist piece of equipment. They estimate that the conservation is about $50,000. I talked to one of their officials last week up at the Palisades who's on their board. They've raised just over $1,000. So they have quite a ways to go. So I told Chris Oliphant, who is their rep, firefighter up there working shift work in the Palisades, I said, well, I'll bring it up again to the AOI membership so that individuals that may not have been aware of it might choose to contribute. Like I said, the QR code's back there. Plus, it's on our website. So if you go on the website and look at AOI and the fire department, I forgot what the tab's called, it goes into all that history of how we maintained and conserved all that equipment for them rather than it end up in the hands of private collectors and all. So anyhow, think of the Friendship Fire Association if you're looking for something to donate to and conserve a piece of DC's fire history.
I'm going to take your mic and give it to Kim. Would you like to talk about? one of the places that we have recently given money to is the DC Archive. So I'm going to let Kim Bender, Director of Higher House, as well as one of our board members, talk about what the DC Archives Foundation has been doing so far.
Thank you. So the DC Archives, for those of you who aren't aware, we have a state archive in DC. It is in Naylor Court, and it is in an old warehouse that is sort of falling apart. And DC has put $105 million in the budget of capital funds towards building a purpose-built DC Archives building on UDC campus, which is going to have programmatic connections to UDC. It's going to be great. In support of this new building, we have created a DC Archives Foundation, which is a 501c3 that is going to raise money to help support this building and its programs and things that it needs that are outside the DC budget. And AOI very graciously donated the incorporation funds to make the foundation happen. I think it has been an issue, the lack of a permanent building in DC has been an issue that AOI has been interested in for many years. So the foundation now exists, it's up and running. We have a website, it's dcarchivesfoundation.org. If you're interested in supporting, please go on the website and process your donation. And if anybody has any questions, you can contact me at the Heinrich House Museum, and I'm happy to answer those questions for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Perfect.
And,
Thank you.
yeah.
So we have a couple of events that within AOI that we're working on and have been doing, so things that you can help with as well. One, we are going to be kicking into high gear our own oral history project. There are a lot of oral history projects out there, so if your eyes are already rolling to the back of your head and saying, I've already talked to people, I'm done, and I've given at the bank, we are going to focus very specifically on family history. So AOI is connected to DC through families and to the family connection. So we are looking for family histories and also how people grew up, especially if you grew up from birth in DC. So your personal experiences and your family history. So we're going to be kicking that up into high gear. So we're going to be doing. You can participate in several ways. One, you can have somebody come and take your oral history. Two, you can have somebody do it through Zoom or other technology so that you don't actually have to leave your house or have somebody in your house. And three, you can also do a self history and answering a number of questions that we're going to be providing. So think about that. It'll get you kind of thinking about your own memories as we are gearing up towards that. And we will have more information about that soon. As you're thinking about that, our July meeting is going to be a brunch. It's a memories and mimosas brunch. So one of the ways to really get you thinking is alcohol, right? So mimosa, come drink. And our topic for July, and that is on July 18th, is going to be the summer of 1968. Few things going on in DC during that summer. So things that you can remember. Come ready to share your personal memories, memories of what you saw going on in the city. That certainly was a volatile political time in the city itself, as well as marches and the Poor People's Campaign and concerts that were happening in DC. So we are going to come together as we did last July. It was such a success, and thank you all for participating and sometimes letting us know about the illegal activities that you actually had conducted in DC, and we promise we keep bleeping those out. But please come and share. That is our way of collecting stories and getting you ready to do some of that oral history. We're also looking for collaborations. So if you're involved with other organizations, whether it's the villages in your neighborhood or other historical societies, and we would like to start putting together other groups of people that we know. For example, next spring, we're going to have somebody come to talk about the history of Arlington in Virginia in the 1920s. So we are going to try to have maybe a connection with the Arlington Historical Society. So, and invite some of those members here. So if there's anything like that you would like to see us cover, or you would like to have a connection to, let us know. Same in terms of where you might live or other groups. We're looking to have outreach, so awareness and telling people about AOI, as well as possibly having speakers that we know or within AOI go to other local communities to speak. So your apartment, if you live in a large apartment building like the Kennedy Warren and they have events, or through your local church or your villages, let us know. We are going to rely on our members to give us kind of some of those opportunities and connections, but we would love to tell more people about us. So please feel free to let us know. Some things you might be interested in. I'm keeping this short because I want to make sure we get to our speaker. A couple things going on this weekend. One is an author's talk at MLK Library. It is Rodney Brooks. It's the rise and fall of Freedmen's Bank and the socioeconomic impact on Black America. That is Saturday afternoon, if you're interested in that, at the MLK Library. There is drag bingo at St. John's Episcopal Church in Georgetown. We have the associate rector, the Reverend Dr. I always do that, I'm so sorry. Laura Nada, who's here, has organized that. The proceeds from drag bingo at 4:30, there's a silent auction. 5:30, there's drag bingo with a couple of local Washingtonian drag queens that are going to be calling the bingo, and who also were on RuPaul's Drag Race. So if you might recognize them from that. All proceeds go to the outreach ministries in DC for many different communities, including outreach to the LGBTQ plus communities as well. That is at 5:30. If you're interested, we can get you a discount. The tickets are $50. You come with the code RAINBOW, and you can get the friends and family discount. It's on their website, and you can ask either Laura or myself before you leave if you need more information about that. The Folklife Festival, don't forget about that, starting June 26th on the mall. It's June 26th to July 1st. This year the theme is Indigenous Voices of the Americas. So they're going to be focusing on that connection with the Museum of the American Indian. There is a screening of a documentary and a panel discussion on Saturday, June 29th. It is called Kindred Spirits, Artists Hilda Wilkinson Brown and Lillian Thomas Burwell. This is going to be at the Anacostia Community Museum. These are two African-American artists that are native to Washington and were very successful, but some people do not know their names. And so they are kind of unsung artists. This is in connection. They have a whole exhibit at the Anacostia Museum of Black artists in DC. So if you haven't gotten over to see that, you can go check that out and go see the screening as well. So the filmmakers are going to be there for that panel discussion. Last but not least, before our speaker, I'm turning this over to Nelson for our trivia. All are welcome to participate. Please answer if you have the knowledge.
Just raise your hand first. Okay. I wanted to mention this. Years ago, of course, I've heard that a picture's worth 1,000 words. When I came to Washington, I learned that a political cartoon is worth at least 10,000 words. So here's one about the stadium. Every stadium that's built everywhere in any city at any time, there's controversy over the financing of it. Look at this one. It's very interesting. I'm going to give it to the DC History Center for their collection. And if you have any other things connected with the stadiums, please talk to me about that. I also wanted to mention, back by the fireplace, I have copies of the Washington Informer. I encourage you to take a copy of it and look at it, read it. It's going to have its 60th anniversary next year. And it's really very interesting. They cover a lot of things in the city, the civic city, the cultural events, and political. And of course, as we know, the Washington Post is covering less and less of that. And so it may actually survive, what's going on with the Washington Post, I don't know, but this paper may survive beyond the Washington Post. So please take a copy. Consider, I've been a subscriber for many years. I worked with the Rolarks many years ago when the Home Rule Bill was going through Congress, and it's just a wonderful family. So please take a copy of that. And
managing editor's mother is a member of AOI, Vera Abbott.
oh, okay. Okay, let's get to the trivia questions. I also encourage you, if you come across the Georgetowner, it's also very interesting coverage of many things in the paper. It's a weekly, I think it's a weekly or bi-weekly, I'm not sure, but I'd like to see it survive too. It's covering a lot of things that we don't get anywhere else in our local coverage. Okay, let's get to the trivia questions here. In the fall, I will have quite a few questions about the history of baseball in Washington. I've been doing a lot of research on that, and but I do have one quickie question. I thought it'd be an easy one, and the rules are: if you've won before, you're not eligible, but if somebody else guesses it, they get it, first. We like to get as many prizes around over the years as we can. My glasses on so I get it right. In 1924, so 100 years ago this year, the Washington Senators Baseball Club had a very good season. How did it end? Uh-oh. You got it. There you go. Okay. This one is connected with Juneteenth, which was celebrated yesterday, as a connection with it, because over the years in the last century, many Juneteenth events were held at the National Emancipation Memorial on Capitol Hill in Lincoln Park. The National Emancipation Memorial, located in Lincoln Park, Washington, D.C., was dedicated in 1876. The memorial was funded entirely with donations from emancipated slaves. Charlotte Scott, a free woman living in D.C., is recognized on a plaque at the memorial as having donated the first money she earned as a free woman. What was the amount of her contribution? I'll give you a little clue. It's more than $1, less than $20, but it was quite a bit of money at the time. I'll give you a clue. Abraham Lincoln is on the note. Okay. And I also have back at the table, back on the fireplace back there, a little history of the monument and how it got established. It's really quite interesting. It's the only monument I've ever been found that was completely financed by contributions from individuals. In this case, emancipated slaves were freed under the Emancipation Act, Emancipation Proclamation. And so I have copies of that back there. Please take one and read at your leisure. Thank you. I have at my table. You can come and get your prizes. I have them over here. Okay. You get a surprise too, just for showing up and speaking. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's it. Okay. Yes. Introducing.
I'm just introducing, I'm John Edwards, the Vice President of AOI, and for our featured presentation of the today, Jeff Donohoe came to Washington, D.C. in 1986, soon after graduating from college. He's happy to report that he's never second-guessed that decision. And he's lived on Capitol Hill, DuPont Circle, and for more than 2 decades in Adams Morgan. And I'm also happy to say that I've known him since those days on Capitol Hill some 37 years ago. So he's been here for a long time. He recently took an early retirement from a career as a writer, editor, and communications director. He spent his 35-year career helping colleagues and colleges and universities better position themselves to their many audiences. His final position was at Georgetown University, where he was, among other roles, the editor of Georgetown Magazine. Jeff is happily spending his new and more flexible schedule doing even more volunteer work with Rainbow History Project, an all-volunteer organization founded in 2000 that collects, preserves, and promotes DC's LGBTQ history. A self-described third-generation history geek, he has been a Rainbow History volunteer almost from its founding, and his areas of special interest are oral histories and social geography. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
I'm going to get situated here a little bit. Do people need to wiggle their seats? It's the perfect time to do it, or if you can't hear me, it's a good time to let me know. Many thanks for the invitation, and of course, when John asked me to do something, I cannot say no. So I'm here very much, we're going to talk about the area where now is the ballpark. So what we are talking about here is a neighborhood in transition. And so when I think of an organization that knows about and cares about neighborhoods in transition, it's the people in this room. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a Rainbow History colleague, Delaney Resweber. One of these days I'm going to get it right off the top of my head. Delaney joined a couple of years ago with Rainbow History Project. She's our newest board member, and she comes in with a lot of background that's going to help us with our improving our social mapping, social geography mapping. And if we have a little bit of time at the end, she'll just maybe kind of whip us through, he will whip us through some stuff on our website. So to begin, I kind of chose this title, Before the Ballpark, because it has to do with time, but I also like it because it had to do that if you could imagine the ballpark, a lot of places that were important in the gay community were just spilling out in front of it. So it has sort of two meanings around what the sense of the word before is. So I'm going to hit the next slide, but one of the things I want to say is I think, if you have a long and complicated question, maybe, or comment, leave it to the end. But if I use a term that you don't know about or something like that, just shout that out, because this is your presentation. So, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing my own slides. Okay, great, okay. Oh, one person I have to really thank before I thank JR, who works here at the center, got me all set up, and I think he's a combination of technical genius and therapist. So I am duly appreciative. Okay, so the first thing I want to know is how many people in the room maybe just have a little sense of what Rainbow History Project is, or if they've heard about it? Okay, great. So I have this descriptive slide, but I'm going to take a little time going through it. Rainbow History Project has a really dedicated, pretty concise mission of LGBTQ history in Washington, D.C., and sort of the nearby DMV area. I am still not used to saying DMV. We're really here to make sure that this history not only lives on beyond us, but also that we share it with other people. We do not collect for ourselves alone. So we were founded in 2000, and it's really one of those stories that we were founded out of frustration. We had Mark Meinke, who was a very early leader. This organization would not exist without him. Was trying to do some research, and he found very little documentation about gay life in Washington, D.C., And there's a bunch of reasons about that Will could dance back to. And then one of the other problems was where it was stored, if it was stored in a university library, he was told, you're not a researcher, which is probably you don't have a PhD or you're not affiliated with a university. And some of that stuff has guided us through today. So founded in 2000, so we're coming up on our 25th anniversary. We are all volunteer. We have occasionally had grant money, or a student comes from a university that can provide them with grant money, but this happens because people make it happen. The major programs that we have are the things that you would probably expect: online archives, physical archives, oral histories, our Places and Spaces database, which is we're going to be drawing from that today. Our Community Pioneers program, where we honor people who have really been trailblazers in this community. I see at least one of them out in front of us, Craig Howell, very early community pioneer. We have timelines, things happening in DC. And as I said, we don't collect this just to collect it. We collect it so it's the basis of what we can share with people. And sometimes that's public programming, but also people have been talking about, Jamie Kirchik the other year did Secret History of Washington, D.C., made use of our archives. Eric Cervini, who was in the #2 spot for the Pulitzer Prize for his biography of Frank Kameny, made generous use of our archives. It will probably be the only time I am thanked in a book. So and of course, we have our address where you can find everything online. One thing I want to say before we come off of the physical part of this, when we were founded in 2000, as I said, and it took a while for us to figure out we wanted to be. People thought we should be a museum. Okay, well, we were not going to be able to do that. Even collecting objects is difficult for us. So we were going to become an archive, and we knew even then that we weren't going to be able to be people who had a physical space for archiving. So it took some time, but in 2008, we created a partnership with the DC History Center, and that is an absolutely amazing partnership. They're very supportive. So not to drag it out too much, but we do a first level pass of what is the information, curated a little bit, why is this important? We're out there collecting this in the community, and then the DC History Center is set up for the highest level of care and set up to work with researchers who come in and need to use this collection. So that is a really great thing. So, okay, so I want to talk today about how did this neighborhood become a ballpark, and goes back further, but some of the super important years is when the ballpark is gaining energy to become the ballpark. So one of the things I would like to say is it was a neighborhood. That was a place where people lived, and it was a place where there were businesses that supported any neighborhood, a barber shop, corner grocery store. But it all became Nationals Park. And one of the things that's important is this was a major place for gay entertainment, mostly nighttime entertainment, as an entertainment district. So this is a map that's recent, and if it's pink with a little martini icon, it's a bar. If it's green, it was a bathhouse, and the blue is it was some kind of a theater. All I want you to take out of this is not what we were facing when the ballpark was opening. This is a 30-year cumulative history. So this is everything that ever was down there that we can record and verify. And so just to do one thing, this right here, this is the ballpark as it stands today. And you can see some of this stuff is on the first baseline. So I want to talk a little bit about, break this down a little bit about what was happening. This begins in the 1970s for the most part and goes on right until the ballpark paved everybody under. Okay, so this is the 1970s. And one of the things that I think about in the 1970s is it is a time when there is sort of an explosion in nightlife. And you can look at not just here, but you can look at it in other cities like New York. You know, this is our version of the meatpacking district. So again, just follow the color code. These are now labeled. I'm always fascinated that Pier 9, and we'll talk a little bit at them, was always just a little off the grid. This is Buzzard's Point down here. I have a theory that if you went out and interviewed people, if they know where Buzzard Point is, you would get a lot of blank expressions. But they were always down there. They were always a little secluded for the time they ran. So you see there's another pod here, and then there's this pod up here in the 70s. So I want to talk about these a little bit. I'm obviously not going to talk about every dot, or we would not be getting out of here today. Some of what I would like to talk about either have really interesting stories or as stories about people losing their neighborhood for different reasons. They always end up being a story about social justice. So that is one of the things that I think a lot about when I think a lot about a map like this. So again, these were nighttime. So we have bars, we have dance clubs, we have bathhouses, we have movie theaters showing movies, pornography. You know, they were gay porn shops. I'll just get to it faster. I don't need to tap dance so much, maybe. So that's what this neighborhood was developing to be. One of the things that I also think is interesting about it is it was not a particularly safe neighborhood. That is a fairly kind assessment on that. Some of the places that go in here for all the reasons that people go. You know, it's an opportunity, it is low rent. What's, I think, unique about this, or at least interesting about this, that some of the places who went in here were being forced out or had been forced out of other neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. So there was a massive cleanup of things on 14th Street and around Penn Quarter. Another area was some of these businesses were on what we would now call Barracks Row, 8th Street Southeast. And they were a little too popular, and they were making too much noise. So there was some pressure from the neighborhood and to get them in a different location. So, you know, this is a story about migration upon migration upon migration. One of the things I think that this really is probably the most basic point of this is this was an incredibly isolated area. You may have driven around it, but there was no metro. And the thing about very isolated neighborhoods are the rent is pretty cheap. Some of these were a good size in square footage, so rent needed to be reasonable. And I think one of the things that's most important about it, and this is something I think a lot about when I was putting this presentation together, is when you're isolated, you have a sense of anonymity. And so, yes, if you were in some place, you could see and be seen, but you were probably not likely to run into your boss. So the isolation of this tends to give way to some anonymity that probably fits perhaps with nightlife. And again, this would be a great kind of thing to talk about as we can when we get to the discussion part of this. But one of the things I find really interesting is part of the gay community in Washington, D.C. is trying to be visible. We have activist groups like GLAA, the Gay and Lesbian Activist Alliance. I think I got that right. And I'm just going to pick a year, 1975, which is the first year of Capitol Pride. The organizers of Capitol Pride, it was a block party, and they in the DuPont Circle area on 20th Street, and the law required them to, in order to have a block party and the street blocked off, they had to get X percentage or all the people in the neighborhood to sign off on a petition, and it has to be specific. So it was for gay pride. And when you look at the most important pictures from this Gay Pride in 1975, again, held in DuPont Circle, they are holding up a proclamation from the city council that says, today is Gay Pride Day in Washington, D.C. So Pride was political, and people were trying to be, I think, more out and more visible and strut their stuff a little bit more. And then you have this energy here at sort of the time frame, which is, how do we isolate? How do we kind of remain anonymous and do things that aren't necessarily on the radar screen? So one last thing before I leave this slide. Obviously they're not color-coded because it's not part of our programming, but this wasn't all just gay space. It was also straight space for similar activities, activities that made a lot of noise. So moving on a little bit, there's a couple of people that their names aren't super important, but I'm going to read them anyway. Bill Bickford, Don Culver, and Henry Hecht, and a few more people, but they were really a lot of the people who were making this stuff happen, converting it, owning it, operating it. All of these people had multiple locations, not just in this area. So I don't know if they had this sort of grand mission that they wanted to create these opportunities for socializing for queer people in DC, but their names turn up over and over again. So one last thing. That's my phrase. One last thing before we kind of head out on this is, I think words that I would use over again on this would be displacement, migration, and what we would now call entrepreneurship. I mean, who looks at a warehouse and sees a dance club? An entrepreneur. So those were words that we were using in the 70s. So I'm going to take this look. I already pointed out Pier 9 once, but this was just about the first big club that went in this area, and that's 1971. And it was Pier 9, mostly known as the Pier. It was started by Bill Bickford and Don Culver. It had 2 floors of bars and dancing. It also had a space there for patrons who were under the drinking age. But one of the things that is most important, we'll come back to it in our friend Pier 9, is that it had a restaurant. And and some of you probably have this knowledge, and because this applied in the straight universe and in the gay universe, there were very complex laws about drinking and serving liquor in Washington, D.C. I'm getting some nodding heads, you are my people. And the way that it was done, it's sort of a prohibition hangover in D.C., and I think it really comes because it was congressionally mandated just for D.C. It's that kind of D.C. city and symbol and that tension that's always going back and forth. So Pier 9, again, had a restaurant, but one of the things that I find most fascinating and charming about it is at the time, because of this congressional restrictions that were not just about age, there were things like you could not stand in a restaurant unless you were waiting for a table. Okay? So you were then sent to a table, and then you remained at that table. So all this sort of social flexibility, like, oh, there's my friend, that teller at my bank, the person who rides my bus, who I think is kind of interesting. This social construction has made it difficult. And this was in straight and gay bars, but I always say that people who are in a minority position always feel these things more than people who are in the majority thing. And the thing that's really great about this Pier 9 thing is that the way they got around this, not moving your, it was an investment of time to somebody move your drink to another table. They had, all the tables had a number on them, and all the tables had telephones. So you could call the hottie at number 9 and see if there was any point of coming over. I live in terror. If I had lived then, that I would have picked up the phone and the other voice on the other line would have said, "No, not you, the other one." That's just my feelings. So, there are fun things that can happen here, and what's kind of happening about this time is it's also sort of the rise of the super club. On South Capitol Street, there was, in Barracks Row, there was a 2-level dance floor, and they were one of the ones where the neighborhood really wanted them to leave. But this is sort of a new thing all across America, all across cities, the development of the super club. So their space here was probably one of them, was definitely one of them. And so you were having a great time, you were making all the noise you wanted, and you didn't have any nosy neighbors. So I think 2 things I'd like to say about it. The Washington Star called Pier 9 probably the best disco in town, while the Post declared that Pier 9 was one of the best ongoing parties yet invented. So I guess that's high praise. I want to move on to, so that's sort of an entry point. I want to move on to the next slide. Oh, that's the pier. So sorry. So they had their own matchbooks. Remember matchbooks and collecting matchbook covers? This was their space there. Now this was after they had closed, but from photos it was not a whole lot more glamorous when they were there. So this was the Pier 1 space. I missed that, so sorry. The next place I'd like to talk about is Lost and Found, which opened almost immediately after Pier 9. I think it's something you see with bars also in the DuPont Circle area, is once the first one got open, there was like this pent-up demand, and 2 or 3 opened other ones opened in a year. So this was their opening ad. One of the things I think is really great about this is, I can see this better than you can, but no, that's not what I wanted to do. They also, excellent cuisine at reasonable prices. So they were also a supper place. Large dance floor with built-in light show, unique individual stand-up tables. This was their logo. They were on L Street down in Southeast. So this was their opening ad. Mixed in with like Lost Dogs and Maid Needed. But I want to tell something that's much more important than it was a fun place to go, because it was a fun place to go. Really, the thing that's most important is controversy when it opened. And it was practicing a practice called carding. So how many people in the room have a sense of what carding is? Okay, so carding comes from an identity card. Okay, so if you're an underage drinker, you show that and you get someplace else. Carding was a practice, interesting, that starts earlier in DC history with white bars and restaurants that wanted to keep African Americans out during late segregation. What happened here was, and it wasn't just Lost and Found, it was a number of places, had carding, and it really was, just to bring it down, they wanted gay men to come in, and they didn't want women, they didn't want trans people, they didn't want African Americans, they didn't want other people of color, and they didn't want people who were trans or who were in drag. So a version of carding was, you would go up to the door and they would say, Fire Marshal Bob was just here 20 minutes ago, and we can't let any more people in. You have to wait till 20 people come out. And then the next person would just pass right brush right by you and get to go in. So there's a lot of stuff still in the 70s that was very discriminatory, no big surprise there. This did get attention in DC's gay activist community, and we have some people about that. I know you can't read this. This is not the most important thing in the world. And I missed one slide, but that's okay. No, I have it. Okay, so this was a protest, and it's kind of difficult to, it's easy to read, but it's hard to deal with. This is a flyer, and that's stuffed under somebody's door, or put on a windscreen or something like that. So I think one, that it existed is great, and that somebody saved it and donated it to Rainbow History Project, I think is really the value of community-based archiving. Some selections from here about this practice. As you may know by now, Washington's gay organizations have begun a series of legal actions, including a weekend picket against the new Lost and Found on L Street Southeast. Why? Because of flagrant discrimination about gay blacks and women. Lost and Found's racist policies were exemplified and acknowledged by Bill Perry, who represented the management in an October meeting with some major players in Washington, D.C.'s gay politics. And his explanation was, this is a southern city. He said that it was possible that the Lost and Found would bar all black people, and clearly indicated the principal reason for Lost and Found's ID program, the carding, was to exclude as many gay blacks as possible. I'll read just a little bit more, and then we can all have a cry. This is how the Lost and Found carding game is played. 2 pieces of ID are required: a driver's license and a passport or a birth certificate. Well, if there's anything, you don't take your passport to a bar. You just know that. And so people would perhaps not be asked for an ID at all, or they would be asked for multiple forms of ID. So really, they were just looking to have a white, affluent crowd. So the thing that I would like you to take out of this slide is, this is a photo of the people picketing and protesting outside. Well, that was not what I wanted to do. There we go. Picketing and protesting outside of, I think this is indeed Lost and Found. What I find so fascinating about this is, one, this is the people picketing. It's not positive for Lost and Found. And this whole thing, when you read it, is Lost and Found's apology to their customers who had to go through a picket line, had to cross a picket line and hear derogatory comments. So they're not even trying to reposition themselves in what they're learning through activist group. They're apologizing to their patrons for their inconvenience. So Lost and Found did change that policy, and there's and these activists, and Craig, I might need some help here. I've heard it both the Committee on Gay Bars and the Committee on Open Bars. Do you remember? Open Bars. Okay, good. You want a Tootsie Roll. Okay, so one of the bars to open within another year of that, I don't have any slide for it, it's the same story, was called Grand Central, and it had the same kind of carding policy and protests by activists against this carding policy. Grand Central only ran for about 3 years, and some people think that they just got tired and they saw they were never going to be able to have, that they were going to have to admit people they didn't want to, so they just gave up and quit. A couple of things that I don't have the time to do in this, but there were some really fun places. There was something on K Street that opened in 1972, which was called Way Off Broadway, and it was really kind of like a cabaret. It was a 300-seat theater, and a very long-term drag organization in Washington, D.C., the Academy, which was founded in 1961. This was a space that they really had a lot of time to play in. The place that succeeded that was Club 55, went on and was very strong up until about the ballpark. So the next thing I want to go to is also down there, which is the Cinema Follies. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. But one of the things that's really important about this is it was one of the first places, because it had a fire, that really caught mainstream media attention in DC. There was a really good, decent amount of Washington Post coverage of this at a time when you could not count on Washington Post coverage. So this is a very sad story. So it was, the part of this was a theater that showed X-rated pornography aimed at gay men. And it had been, every once in a while, frequently targeted. Police or others would harass or call names about people coming in or out. And people would say, I know who you are, I have your address, I'm going to, it was some form of entrapment. It opened in 1975. The fire is in October 1977. It began that afternoon with an explosion. And some people say it was the carpet cleaner that they were using was highly flammable, or some people put it back that there was like a space heater or something like that. But whatever it was, this place went up really quickly. And the problem was that the fire blocked the exit for people to get out on the first floor, and trying to get out on the second floor was impossible because the door was padlocked from the outside, which is usually a way that they keep people from skipping out on their bar bill. So the men who died of smoke inhalation. They were not burned, they were really smoke inhalation. It ends up being a total of 9 men who die in this fire. It took 3 days to identify 8 victims on the scene, and a ninth died 2 weeks later in hospital. One of the things I find very, very poignant about this is that only one of the 9 was carrying a piece of identification. So people had to backtrack from missing people. So there's just something for me about getting divorced from your identity. And I know a driver's license is just a piece of plastic, but there's something about it, again, this sort of idea of anonymity. So again, there were 9 people who died. And the one who did have an ID was 28 years old. And most of the people who died were straight people married with children. So this, in some ways, shows what is the value of a resource like this. And these people who died included a congressional aide, a pastor, an Army major, a hairdresser, and a World Bank economist. Those had to be reported because they were deaths, but the names of the people who survived were not released as an invasion of privacy. The one good thing that comes out of this, well, there's a couple of good things. There was a lot of discussion about whether the bar had done something illegal by blocking these exits, or was it that it had not been duly and properly inspected by fire inspectors from the city. And that was a lot of back and forth, and maybe Craig, you could give us some insight on that now or later. Okay.
What year was that again?
The fire was 77. Okay. So it did up the amp because it was nationally, it was reported all over the city in the Post. But the one good thing that did happen of it was the recognition of these men who were married with children. And it led to this organization pretty quickly called Gamma, and I may mess it up a little bit, but it was a group for married men. So it was sort of Gay and Married Men Association or whatever. And that was a support group for people who were questioning their relationships, maybe wanted to get out, but it also provided social support and social things to do, not just as a support group. So that is something that does come out of these people who died in the Cinema Follies fire. So this building, this was it, but it also operated afterwards. It didn't have much structural damage. This is when it was the kind of center, the hub for Empire Cab. And if you were to go there now, and I didn't include a slide, it's an absolutely, is it residential or office building, John? Residential. Luxury condos. There is no other kind of condo that John designed. So I have the slide if you want to look at it, but I didn't put it in here. There were other clubs operating at the time. One of them was the Glory Hole, which was a men's club. They kind of, when Follies was out of space, they moved up the street and they took second floor space from the Glory Hole. I don't have a photo of it. And at that time, the Glory Hole changed its name to the Glorious Health Club and Art Gallery. I feel robbed that I did not have the opportunity to go. So, but you see, you know, we still have Pier 9 down there, but we're growing these spaces, and there's more and more things coming in that I'm not going to. So there's your buddy Lost and Found, Club 55 that I mentioned. So there's a lot of stuff going on that lasts for a while. I think we might have missed a slide on this, and that's my fault. I wanted to talk about, and sorry I don't have a slide, of a place that was called The Other Side that was on Southeast. It started in 1978. And what's important about The Other Side was that it was a women's dance club. And I don't know, yes, there it is, Other Side with a pink martini glass. So I think a couple of things that I want to say about that. This might be the place where we expect a women's bar to be in this sort of very kind of rough neighborhood. It gave, you know, a friend that I talked with about it, it gave way to the too often repeated, why did the lesbian cross the road to get to the other side? The people who ran it had a very successful bar already on Capitol Hill on 8th Street, so they brought some of that expertise with them. It was dancing for women. That was new. Same-sex dancing had been illegal in DC for a very long time. They kind of, Other Side really pushed the envelope on that, which is probably also just hoping the police didn't show up. And then they end up having a very successful relationship with DC's drag scene. Something also, Kaja Follies, it's in here, my eyesight, yeah, there it is, was a nude dancing club, not patrons. No, we didn't want that. It featured nude male go-go dancers. DC was incredibly progressive on full frontal nudity in clubs like this. And so you were there, and sort of these gentlemen's socks acted like a cash box, but you're only making deposits, no withdrawals. This is really different than what you get in a lot of other cities. One thing about this that I haven't completely figured out yet is on believe it was the ground floor of this new dance go-go place was a place called King Pizza. And there are, so who has a pizza shop in a go-go club? The idea that I've heard from a bunch of people in oral histories, and oral histories is what really informs all this stuff, is that it gave a way for people to go in under the guise of picking up or ordering a pizza and coming out with a pizza box, which sort of put a little bit of a fig leaf over you might have gone to the go-go club. And I just sort of made the point, but I would like to make it again. You got to really work hard to get this information, and doing oral histories and this Places and Spaces database were two projects that when Rainbow History got started in November of 2000, that they identified as top priority projects. Well, everything was a top priority, but this was a really top priority to do oral histories because we had already lost in almost 20 years with AIDS and age, way too many voices. And the voices is what tells you about this. You know, we can verify something, but this detailed information only comes from oral history. So, you know, we keep putting things in, Delaney, you know, being in charge of our social geography. And it's really funny, like, just preparing for this, I found a wrong date. So I'll give it to you. I'll slip it to you. Now we're going to go on to the 1980s. This slide, I don't want to say it's misleading, because I put it here and I would never mislead you. But Food and Friends was a service, cooked meals that volunteers took to people living with AIDS in a certain area in Washington, D.C. And having known I never volunteered with that, but, you know, some people welcomed a friendly volunteer and did a little chit-chat. Some people wanted you to leave it on the doorstep. And some people, you know, they came with instructions, wanted to make the volunteer really clear that someone else in the house was not supposed to know that this person in the house had AIDS. So Food and Friends, it's under the 80s. It was started at Westminster Presbyterian, which is sort of just barely off of the maps that we've been able to show. We had to crop a couple things just to make this presentation realistic. And so for a number of years, they operated out of the church kitchen. That's where they did their cooking, meal prep, packaging. That's where you got your assignments. But they grew out of that space, and they had a space with this lovely awning. This does not open until the 90s, but I put it in with the 80s because that's where their story really begins. Now we're in the 90s, and goodbye Pier 9 way down here, but we still have a pretty good-sized migration up here. Just like every place else in the world, a restaurant will be open, and it'll be open for 2 years, and then it closes. It's like Foxtrot grocery store. Then, you know, you wake in, you've got a peak slip, and then later, 6 months later, somebody decides, well, I'll have a better chance of running a restaurant here or a bar. So you see some recycling of bar spaces. For the purposes of this mapping, we are counting individual businesses, not individual street addresses. So if a street address was 3 or 4 different clubs over time, it gets 3 or 4 different hits, which I'm not losing any ethical sleep over. So one of the things that we're going to talk about here is tracks. And yeah, we've got, it's the 90s, we've got some tracks people here, yes. You know, every place that opened was the super club, right? There was one on 8th Street, and then Lost and Found was the super club. And then Tracks opened, and it was like we had never seen a super club before in our lives. And it was a Denver-based company. The people who operated it had a lot of experience in food and bev retail. They had worked at Lost and Found. One of the things about Tracks was it was extremely advanced technologically. It had huge video screens, it had multiple rooms, it even had a quiet timeout room. And it was something that I think there's some discussion, would you call it a gay club or not? But it was a place that was really blended. You didn't know who you'd be dancing next with or next to. And I remember as a kind of a young college person out of college person, that, you know, it was just the most exotic. It was like going from Kansas to Oz. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. And, you know, since I've kind of told a little bit of a personal thing, you know, I would go to Lost and Found when I got here in '86. And I led a very sheltered life. You know, I grew up in a town with more cows than people, and I went to a college with more corn than people. So I didn't really know too much about this. I knew who I was, but I didn't have a network. And Lost and Found, which we talked about before, which opened in the 70s, this is early 80s for me, or mid 80s, it was the first place I ever saw two men dancing together. It was the first place I ever saw two men or two women kissing. And so it was really, you know, it was really an eye-opener, and I'm very grateful for it. So some of the things about tracks that were really memorable, not only did they have great music, they had multiple rooms that had completely different music. They had outdoor space. It had a barbecue grill, and it had a sand volleyball setup. So they had sand volleyball. So, I mean, why wouldn't you love tracks, you know? But it was really a true super club. You know, and it just had a much more integrated clientele. And it ran, another thing that was fun about it, and I think also about Lost and Found, the music was so loud that students from Gallaudet could come and dance because they could have the beat, feel the beat of the music through the floor. And that you know, that's a great thing to remember. It ran for about 15 years. And so now we're going to go on to, and again, all this is stuff going, I'm just kind of pulling out stuff that I think is super important. And the next one we're going to talk about is, I hope I have it right, is Nation. Did I advance? Okay, well, that's okay. Nation was coming on about when Trax was going out. And as I've said, Lost and Found was the super club, then Trax was the super club, Nation was the super club. And that was also, I wouldn't call it a chain, but they had other locations. It started out as a music concert venue. And its real competition was the 930 Club downtown. Did anybody go to the 930 Club? So it was bigger than the 930 Club, but that was its main competition. So in the beginning, they had a lot of musical acts come in, and the dancing part was secondary. It was not well set up to be a music venue, so they really kind of converted their business into really this dance place. The super gay, it was pretty integrated. The super gay night was Saturday night when it was called Velvet Nation. It was really pretty cool. This is just one slide. So it was very interesting. It was very cool. It was the it place for the it boys to go. Maybe a little bit of it girls. I think the only time I was ever in there was an Obama-Rama fundraising for the first administration. So that tells you a little bit about my 90s social life. But this was a warehouse. And again, it's the whole thing of like, who sees a warehouse and thinks multi-level dance floor? So it was really quite something. And then Nation was one of the first ones to see the ballpark coming. And I think Nation did, and I know that from talking to people, this isn't just mine, is that once there was a discussion about whether or not this site would be, in general, a place for the new ball stadium, they heard it once and got out. They just figured that if it happened once, it was going to happen again. It was just a matter of time. So Nation got out fast, faster than some of the other people, other businesses that we've been talking about. So they got, so eventually this neighborhood gets taken by eminent domain. I love this because this is Nation. We were just looking at it. And what I love about this is it gives you a sense of how big that space was. It's like you could put an aircraft carrier in there. And obviously that is a slide of what demolition looks like. We have some other stuff. I couldn't resist, so sorry. So there's a couple of things that I think are interesting in this final inning, which final inning is a chance for me to say things that I didn't get a chance to. This is harder than it looks. And the other part of it is it's a time for us to talk. There's a couple of things that I think are really interesting in this, and I haven't said this all the way through because you folks probably know it was not easy or safe to go to that neighborhood. I got some nodding heads. So first you had to go with a friend with a car, and it had to be a friend who promised not to get a new friend and leave you at the bar. Okay. Also, not as simple as it sounds. If you went down by cab, you had to be in the cab with the door shut and locked before you gave the location that you were going to, because cab drivers would not take you there. You had a 50-50 chance of getting mugged. And, I don't know that it was violent, but it was uncomfortable. It was dangerous. And one of the things that I think about is I'm not somebody who puts myself in harm's way very often. Like I'm a scaredy cat, and that we would go there. What that says to me is how desperate we were to have this larger world played out in front of us. Because I don't know if we were taking our hands on our life, but it was scary until you got in, and then it was fine, and then you had to leave when it was over, even later, and try to find a cab to go back or find your friend. One of the things also that I find interesting is, I don't have a slide for it, I'm sorry, but a bathhouse club baths opened in 1972 on O Street. And it was still open at the time that they were doing the planning and site selection for the ballpark. And one of the things that's interesting is, a lot of the health information and the health direction during the AIDS crisis and longer was bathhouses were out. You needed to narrow your thing. It's sort of just like COVID. You had to get a pod. You had a barrier of some kind, a condom. Sorry. And bathhouses were seen as sort of part of the problem, but they were also celebrated as places that you could go to forget your problems. And one of the things that I'm sorry I don't have the slide for the club baths, but it opened in '72. And what I find so interesting is it survived AIDS, but it did not survive ballpark fever. So I'm kind of getting sort of to the end here, because I feel like presentations always are, we'll have question and answer at the end, and then there's no time for questions. So I want to talk just a little bit about the final inning and obviously the question that's hanging out there, because none of these spaces that were on these maps survived. Ziegfeld's, which was a little, it was a drag place with another place where young gentlemen danced in only socks. They lasted until about 2020 because they were a remote location, but eventually even they were coming down because it was the Navy Yard. Everything that's going up, everything is 10 stories that goes up. So even they went out. Just a little bit in the where do people and places go. And I started with, I hope at least, the Post and everybody saying, there's, in the words of Gertrude Stein, there's no there, that it was desolate, that there was nothing there, and that was their justification. I get why the city was doing that. They wanted to press through an idea. But I find it really shocking that the Washington Post never challenged this, because all they had to do was, I'm a writer, the first thing you do is you go online and figure out what you already wrote about it. So, they gave those glowing reviews. Don Culver, who ran Lost and Found, had an obituary where they really spoke glowingly about how important Lost and Found was and how beautiful it was, questionably beautiful. Oh, a Don Culver story. So he opened Lost and Found. He ran it for 20 years. And for the March on Washington for Gays and Lesbians, I've sort of bastardized the title, but you got the idea, a national march. That was April '93, and he went on the roof of Lost and Found to put up like a parachute textured banner or big balloon or something, and a gust of wind came up and carried the fabric and poor Don off the roof, and that was the end of him. So at least he died where he loved, so we'll give him that. So just one of the things I kind of want to say on this with the stadium deal, and then I will try to answer questions, is, when this was getting done, our mayor at the time was Anthony Williams, and he promised just compensation, because I've lifted it directly, to property owners who would leave their land if the publicly funded stadium came up in order to lure the Montreal Expos. So I'm not completely sure what that means. I have talked to some people about people in the neighborhood, and that is not my expertise. I have heard that they were given vouchers, and a lot of them could only afford to go someplace like Prince George's County, and the vouchers for housing couldn't be enforced from DC in Prince George's County because it's in a different state. Some of the stuff on what these businesses were given is that they could have compensation, but they had to open only in a neighborhood that was like the neighborhood they just left. And by that time, there was no meat packing district left in Washington, D.C. So, I think a couple of different things, and I'd like to talk more about it, but I think what's happening here is part of this in the early 2000s is people need dance clubs and restaurants and bars and bathhouses less in 2000 than they did in 1970 because there's so many other ways of meeting and connecting with people. So I don't know that there was, and I was here, I was alive, if there was like a huge outpouring of complaint in the gay community about the loss of this heritage. So I could be wrong about that. I'd love to hear from other people. But I think that by the time we got to the final inning, there were so many other ways for gay men and women to connect and communicate. So the last thing I will say is, I guess, goodbye. But final inning is about you. So I will try to do my best to answer a question or make a comment, or if somebody wants to tell me I'm dead wrong, that's fine.
We are unfortunately out of time.
Oh my God, I talked too much. I'm so sorry.
No, it was absolutely fabulous. So maybe we can, if you do have a question, we can kind of put it to this table, and if you're like to hold court and answer questions and take comments here, because I have a feeling that we are going to have some.
I haven't worn a watch since March 2020, so sorry about that.
No, thank you. But I would like to thank you so much. And I know we will probably have so many questions. We might have you as a part 2. So don't. So hold that thought.
Well, you have some experts in the room. So.
Thank you. I have a certificate of appreciation for you as well.
Great.
And a coin and
a
bookmark for you. I do also want to let you know, number one, again, our next meeting is in July, and it's 1968, the summer of 1968, and I have a feeling we might have some connections with what we heard today, so please bring your memories. Also, not only thank you all guests for coming, but we had a contingency from the Gay Men's Choir, and to let you know that not only thank you for coming, but their season starts up again in September, so please take a look for that. Have a great rest of your month. Happy Pride. Thank you for coming. Would you like to sing us off with a note? I'll sing you off with a note. Okay, I will not sing you off with a note. Goodbye. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll have Jeff hold court over
Right.
here if you would like to
So,
come and
I'm-
have a question or comment.
I'm happy to talk, and Delaney's happy to walk you through our database.